Welcome to the Out of the Game Radio podcast. I'm Sean Elliott, and today I'm joined by Jeff Green.
Hi.
Luke Smith.
Hello.
Guy Kroll.
Hola.
And Robert Big Burrito Ashley.
Hey.
Okay, actually, this is...
Big Burrito first. Never mind.
So this is the Out of the Game podcast. This is our second episode. Today we're going to talk about GDC, the Game Developer Conference, which we all returned from yesterday and in some cases this morning. We're going to talk about a nation known as Pussystan and the males who disappear, who are via extraordinary rendition vanish into that nation, and a number of other things.
Sign up for that. Okay. All right.
Okay. First
wife
thing,
said I can't talk about that.
dude, that means you're halfway in the nation. Then we're going to extradite.
That was the joke. All right, go on.
Okay. All right, man. Last time people rightfully commented that we started off on shaky footing and we sort of got used to what we were doing, but just to say something about that. I mean, we all of us here are used to podcast. Well, almost all of us are used to podcasting, facing one another in a room in a proper studio. And Ventrilo, of course, has got Skype actually has got latency issues. It's easier to talk over one another, not tell you can't see someone's face and tell that they want to speak next. So we're going to get over that.
And stop giving all these excuses about why you couldn't tighten out the graphics. You're like, well, there were all these production problems.
Dude, I'm practicing.
We tried to tighten up the graphics.
I'm practicing.
Oh, God.
So the first thing to start off, I just got back this morning and went to the local convenience store, and it's run by an Indian family. And the reason that matters is because as I was in there, they're always playing just really weird, pop radio stuff. And this morning, it was a song about a small town. I didn't know it was John Cougar Mellencamp's song, Small Town, until I came home and I did a Google search for it. But the weird thing is, I was sitting there listening to the song, and he's talking about how, he could be himself in this small town, and it's only in this small town that people let him be just what he wants to be. And so a few things kind of popped in my head. One was that it was kind of I was thinking about the people that run the store. I don't know if that necessarily holds true for them, because I could see the usual. They still have the old, proud to be American signs, and the equivalent of saying, we hate terrorists, that all had to pop up in different communities, after 9/11, to reassure people that just because they weren't necessarily Polish or Irish or whatever, that they weren't Al Qaeda members, in fact.
Uh-huh.
And but moreover, I was just thinking about how completely stupid and banal the lyrics were, and how for most people, I mean, especially if I can think of, depending, it might be if maybe they're homosexual, maybe they were into some kind of subculture or something, but from all the people I know that would fit that bill, they definitely didn't feel like they could be themselves in small towns, and it was only in larger cities where there wasn't necessarily a single dominant way of life. And where am I going with this? Other than the fact is just I started thinking about how, for the most part, I can't stand listening to pop music or most music in general with lyrics, because when I was younger, it just didn't matter. It could be the stupidest thing in the world, and you still listen to it. After some time, I just started realizing that, the only reason people are drinking Bacardi is because it rhymes with party, or the only reason they were mad was because they weren't glad. They couldn't be some indeterminate state in between.
Right.
So,
well, for one thing, a lot of the times the lyrics don't really matter. I often like a song a lot before I actually realize what it is I'm singing. And I remember that way back in the 70s, I really liked, I'm going to admit this in public, I really liked the Bee Gees' More Than a Woman, except that I always thought they were singing Banana Woman. But it didn't matter to me. So I was just walking around school going, Banana Woman. Banana Woman. So,
you realize how gross, you realize what that means, right?
Yeah, totally. That's what's so awesome about it. Yeah, what did I think?
You were seeing the equivalent of tranny surprise in middle school. Or high
I pretty
school,
much was.
Or college,
yeah,
whatever
I beat the crying game by 10 years. The other thing about that John Cougar Mellencamp song, I totally agree with you, Sean. And I think the thing there is, like, he's just writing a song about, it's basically like by rednecks, for rednecks, sort of. He's not, like, celebrating that he can be an individual. It's just like, it's sort of this, like, anti-city, anti-intellectual kind of thing. Like, in the small town, we're keeping it real,
Right.
Basically, this is a song about how he hates Jews, I think is what I'm
That and the fact that it's like, what I take it to mean is that in the small town, he's part of sort of the cultural majority, which means he can be himself because he's part of that cultural majority. But then when he leaves that environment, then he doesn't feel as though he can be himself because
he can be himself, which is like everybody else in the town.
I think you guys are thinking about it way more than he ever did.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
I think that most songwriters just don't think about their lyrics very much. And I think for the most part, the reason that lyrics suck is because when you sing something, it gives the listener the sense that it's true, even when it's not. Like, I think music gives anything that you say some amount of authority, even if what you're saying is totally fucking stupid.
Exactly. It gives it emotional authority, especially.
Well,
yeah.
Sean, did you read the lyrics?
I just started looking at them, and to the point that I began to barf, and I stopped at the and people let me be just what I want to be. But I see the whole, like, there's some awesome lines in there about the Bible Belt's coming to soothe your soul. Actually,
that's from Jack and Diane. Little ditty, another classic John Cougar Mellencamp tune.
Taught the fear of Jesus in a small town. Yeah, there's some other lines like that.
Yeah, I mean,
you really only. Go ahead.
I don't think the lyrics are quite as bad as all that, really. I mean, it's just, I think it's, they might be a little banal, but I think they sort of get at I think what he's trying to get at is the complicated feelings he's got about the small town. Like, it's sort of a love-hate thing. He talks about how, my job is so small town, provides little opportunity. He talks about the fear of Jesus, but then he talks about how he can't forget where it is he comes from and the people who love him. It's not deep, but I think a lot of songs, if you really try to parse them, aren't deep. It's just sort of the emotional sort of sense that comes when you have the various musical elements and the lyrics come together. Right.
And it does make sense. Like, I went to high school in Lakeside, California, which has changed, but at the time, they didn't have, it was really, really small town. And the whole thing was like, you can take the boy out of Lakeside, but you can't take Lakeside out of the boy, and that would pretty much surface any time you'd see a friend 10 years later driving a lifted Toyota or something.
I feel like at least John Mellencamp is trying to mean something, which is better than, say, like 90% of today's sort of rock music. I fucking hate John.
I'm not sure I agree with that. I think I'd rather someone just, like, blatantly go for nonsense than try to be meaningful in a banal way.
I can't stand it. Like, have you guys ever heard that song by the band The Killers called "Human"? And the chorus is "Are we human or are we dancers?" Which is really
why is that mutually exclusive?
I don't know, but the whole song is complete nonsense, and I would rather someone just not bother with lyrics. Like, if you're gonna sing nonsense, then, like, do me a favor and come up with your own little nonsense language, like Sigur Rós or something, so I don't have to listen to your horrible writing. But I would prefer someone at least try to mean something when they write a song, because I'm just tired of the total nonsense thing.
But
maybe they are trying to mean something there.
I don't think
just
so.
haven't parsed that particular song out.
I don't think so. Look it up.
Well, I think from what I understand about how a lot of pop music in particular gets made is that the music is created first, and then the lyrics come afterwards. And that doesn't mean that you can't have meaning in it, but
a classic example of that, guy, is actually Paul McCartney's "Yesterday." You guys know what that was originally called?
It was like eggs.
Scrambled eggs.
Scrambled eggs.
Scrambled eggs. I like to eat them in my bed today.
Good.
I don't know.
Okay, Jeff, it's going nowhere. I don't want to hear that anymore.
No, but
Okay. And guy, were you about to say something else on it?
Yeah, to what Jeff was saying though is like sort of the experience you have when you don't know what the lyrics are, or in this day and age actually when you might be hearing the TV edit, the MTV edit or the radio edit, and not the actual lyrics. And so that happened to me. I guess this would have been back in 03 or 04, when the song "Get Low" by Lil Jon and the East Side Boys came out. Mm-hmm. So the real lyrics are pretty disgusting, but I was only seeing the video on MTV. I wasn't even listening to radio at the time. I didn't own the song or anything like that, so I had no idea. And so they kind of cleaned up the lyrics pretty significantly. So then it's January, and I'm at the Super Bowl in Houston at a party, and it's a late night, late night club kind of situation. The song comes on, and everyone like rushes the floor. And for the first time, I'm hearing the actual lyrics in the song. I'm like, oh shit, that's what he's saying. My mind was blown. Not necessarily in a good way.
It sounds a bit like. Go on, Robert.
Sorry, I was just going to say it's sort of like the shock of when you play a song that you like in Rock Band or sing a song in karaoke that you like, and you see the words scrolling across the screen, and you suddenly realize like how fucking horrible this song that you really like is when you know all the lyrics.
It happens all the time. It's like the first time.
Actually, I have a response to Robert's comment about the song "Human" from the band itself, from the songwriter. He has a direct response, because I looked it up on Wikipedia just now, and there's an actual section in the wiki entry about that song called "Lyrical Confusion," and it says, I'll skip the first part, but anyway, it says, this is in response to Robert, it says, on the band's official website, the biography section states that Flowers, that's the songwriter, is singing, quote, "Are we human or are we dancer?" Singular. And also says that the lyrics were inspired by a disparaging comment made by Hunter S. Thompson. In an interview with Rolling Stone, Flowers said that he was irritated over confusion about the lyric, and also he was irritated that fans were unhappy with the song's dance beat. Quote, "It's supposed to be a dance song. The beat goes with the chorus. If you can't put that together, you're an idiot."
Well, I realized it was a fucking like disco song, but
right. But there you go. It's not that the lyrics are bad; it's that you're an idiot, Robert.
I see. I didn't realize that this stupid like disco song was a Hunter S. Thompson reference, but
which makes it good.
Yeah, that makes it awesome.
It's layered. So changing gears, I was looking to find some space to transition there. Couldn't do it. Let's move on to GDC, which we all. I don't know. I figure we all have something to say about it.
Everyone except for Jeff. Did you?
Not me.
Jeff doesn't.
No, I didn't.
Come on, Jeff. You at least have GDC Envy, right?
I did have GDC Envy. This was the first year in 12 years in the game industry that I've been a game developer, and this was the first year I couldn't go to the game developer conference. So there you go.
I had that same experience last year too. Where I didn't go last year with the Bungie contingent.
That does suck for you, Jeff, because I always felt guilty attending GDC as press, as though I was crashing someone else's party, and it finally felt as though it made sense to be there this time.
Right.
At least, attending the panels and stuff. But at the same time, it was kind of, on the press side, I always assumed, okay, this stuff must be infinitely useful, practical for developers that are involved, and then you start to get the sense that more often than not, it's really another way to sort of congratulate yourself as a studio. I mean, you get candor depending on who's presenting. You'll definitely see moments of candor, or rarely, I think, an entire presentation is nothing but candor. But oftentimes, it was really bizarre. It's like, okay, yeah, this seems entirely common, or this seems like this seems like the way that everyone does something. I'm not certain who's benefiting from this, How's that been for you, Luke?
Well, I mean, like we talked about, I think that there were some talks that you and I sat in that were exactly what you just described, and at the same time, other times when there were particularly obvious things that someone was pointing out at their talk, it was still interesting, I think, to hear about the way they described it, and to hear said studios little nomenclature and way of describing this thing that we describe totally differently, or even just like subtle differences in their approach versus our approach or your approach or whoever else's. And I thought that was actually really valuable, and maybe even more so than just the content, was just the way that different developers talk about these things that are utilized throughout many games.
Mm-hmm. And it's a good opportunity for, I mean, I hate to use networking because it can be such a meaningless buzzword, but I mean, it's a good opportunity for studios to gain some insight into how the others think in those cases. And that's why I think I was so eager to see just like real straight talk. Because outside of, when people are interviewing at different companies and stuff, it can be, a lot of it can be closed shop. People are afraid of sharing their secrets. It takes a long time to sort of come to the solutions that they do. And, it's like you mentioned at GDC, it's not always in everyone's immediate interest to share their secret sauce. But this let me do another thing. At first, when I got there and I was sort of watching it now with new eyes, being former press, I was thinking, I wonder if it's a good thing that the press is here, if this is actually causing people to be more tight-lipped. Because when you think about it, if you're going to go up there and do a post-mortem on your game, it's one thing to present those findings to other people that can that understand where you're coming from and understand like to what extent these kind of like fuck-ups are normal, or they're just part of processes that people are trying to resolve as they work toward streamlining. And then it's another to have someone who's looking for a headline and who maybe in the whole context of of an hour-long panel just pulls out the part that says we fucking screwed the pooch or whatever, and then that goes up as a story. So I was like, is that a good thing? Does that mean that people are just basically censoring themselves here? But then at the same time, I was thinking, well, maybe they're not going to be that honest with one another anyway, or everyone is at least.
Well, Sean and Luke and Jeff, since you guys have been on the other side, longer than I have and in different roles, because you guys are internal, I'm sort of a hired gun. Do you think that the shops need to be as closed as they are? Now that you look at GDC, now that you look at the information that's shared, do you think they need to be as closed as they are, or do you think that just sort of, hey, collective wisdom, because what's really going to make the stuff pop is, more internal to the studio, the specific processes, the specific people they have on staff, than it is to the secret sauce?
Mm-hmm. I think there's some things like philosophically that can be really valuable to be shared across, to be shared with the collective. I think that some of the production talks, certainly, seeing how different studios are organized and how different studios' workflows prioritize and functions. I think there's a level of efficiency that the collective can find some value in. But in terms of like, for instance, revealing the way someone does networking, I think things like that should probably stay pretty close to the vest, because some things like that are what separate game A from game B.
See, that's really interesting. I mean, again, it's like, is that because games are built on technology in a really different way? Like, like the matchmaking in Halo, which people really liked, or even sort of save films. Like, how negatively impacted, now that you're on the inside of Bungie, do you think you would have been if you guys had talked about that publicly and another game came out with it 6 months earlier?
Oh, I think we would for sure be negatively impacted if someone else in the console space was doing the same thing that we're doing with same films. Like people have pointed out, watching what you're playing has been happening on the PC for ages, but so we're not saying that we did that originally anyway. But yeah, it's to go back to what Sean was saying. It's about like the secret sauce. Like there's a little bit of secret spice in everyone's game, and I think that the methods in which people arrive at their secret sauce is valuable and is interesting to learn about. But I don't think I would want to just go to the conference, receive their pro tips, and then go back and all of a sudden be like, all right, I saw this works, let's do this.
I'd say from the consumer's point of view, it's definitely in the interest that studios share, because there's a parallel in art history, with the invention of linear perspective, and at least in Western art history, where and it had been this big challenge. How do you present things in three-dimensional space that resembles life? And at first, when I should be flogged for forgetting exactly who, not Brunelleschi, but originally when the first people worked it out, they did keep it as a trade secret. It was very artists were organized in guilds at the time, and it wasn't a matter of like, hey, just put this out on the equivalent of the internet, and let everyone know what we did. But then when eventually that did happen, you saw the Renaissance, you saw a total flowering of all different art forms, and then it was a matter of not technical, of dazzling people with technical skills, but dazzling people with how you were implementing those technical features in order to, communicate whatever it was you wanted to in your painting, if it was a historical painting or whatever the case may be. So I think that, just from the consumer side, yeah, it would be great if every studio didn't have to sit there and reinvent the wheel for something as simple as, like matchmaking or something like that. But you're absolutely right. You on the studio side, you put all this work into it, and it could be one of the chief selling points of your game instead of something that like everyone else expects.
I'm still skeptical, actually, about the extent. It's hard because part of what made Halo 3 such a great game and gave the reviews was the range and depth of features. And if something 1 or 2 or 3 had popped up on a console previously, or again, like I said, 6 months earlier, a year earlier, then the way the press talks about it is different. So I get that, but I still think the sauce is. I still don't think that's actually the secret sauce. To me, it's more the line. Someone could go and talk about, these are the mics I use in the studio. This is how I think about beats, whatever, that kind of stuff. But that doesn't mean you're going to be, Kanye West.
Right, and that totally makes sense. You could use any number of analogies too. I was thinking for Robert, both music and food would work, where you can give someone a recipe, or you can give someone like the fucking Guitar Magazine tablature song or something, and the actual song or the meal that come out of it are going to be vastly different across people based on what they decide to do with it, how they decide to interpret it. So I do agree with that.
Yeah, and I just think it's sort of like poor creative practice to try to hide what you do from your colleagues. Even if they're in the competition, if you can only stay on top by keeping secrets and not coming up with anything new, then maybe you shouldn't be on top.
It is also fairly. It's pretty much the norm in game design where we do solve problems for one another. Someone will make a game that has vehicles in it first, right? Like Halo wasn't the first multiplayer game to have vehicles in it. You can look at other ones that do it and say, well, what did they get right or what did they get wrong? What can we learn from the way that they did that? And that will happen in everything. People will look at just as like tons and tons of studios have turned to Halo in turn to learn, a ton of invaluable lessons. And where am I going with this? I think what's interesting to me though was just like how go into specifics with this, like how that information is presented. So, for example, I attended a panel hosted by Insomniac that was about how they arrived at the optimal number of players for not necessarily the optimal number of players, but what are the inherent challenges on the technical side, on the design side, and on the social side for having 60 players in the deathmatch game or having 8 players in a cooperative game. So, in the first part, they're and when I said deathmatch, I didn't mean deathmatch. I just mean, competitive multiplayer. And so when they were talking about that, they're saying, we knew we wanted this big number. And that I didn't really understand why, other than just because a big number sounds appealing, But they addressed all the challenges that are inherent with having that many players in the game. And it's that you lose the intimacy. You don't know, unlike, say, you're playing 4-player Quake 3, like you used to play, and anytime you get killed, you know exactly who did it. You saw how he did it, and you want to get revenge on him. Or, a game like Left 4 Dead, if you have an ally who helps you, it wasn't one of 60 people that just happened to be there at the time, but it was, it was Robert or Luke or Jeff or something. And so, what they did is they divided people into squads, and they had a number of separate battles happening across the arena at that time. But then it was interesting that when when they got to talking about the cooperative point, after they had already outlined that, the ideal squad size for them was between 4 and 6 for, the same reason that when you're going to have like a dinner party, that if you have 8 people at a table, you're guaranteeing that you're going to have multiple conversations rather than, a single directed conversation. And it becomes more like going to a bar where you have a ton of people. And the only way to get their attention, instead of them having a million little superficial conversations, is to have an act on stage or something, And one way that they tried to do that was by having, big boss encounters now and then, or having epic versions of enemies and stuff. But they never said, well, and then, so they transitioned to talking about co-op, and it's like, well, wait a minute, why is it 8 players then, right? And that was really interesting to me, because it was like they're putting all the concerns and stuff there, but like selectively omitting other parts, and then like another example of that would be that they found out as soon as you put 8 people in co-op together and they're playing, everyone immediately goes and does their own thing. They're not helping one another, and their way of encouraging that was to give people these really narrowly defined roles, so that if you needed health, you had to go and work with the person who could give you health, or if you needed ammunition, likewise, you had to go to the single player class that could provide that. And then, of course, the downside, which I think we should all be familiar with, is that when you have a really rigid role like that, you can start to feel, and I'm not saying I did in Resistance 2, but you can get to the point where you feel like you're on an assembly line. You're the one who turns this one dial and puts this one screw in, and it's not necessarily as gratifying. Maybe in some early MMOs that kind of erred on that direction too, where it's like a healer, unlike WoW or something, where a healer can do a number of other duties. All the healer did was pretty much stand around and heal people, Anyway, go ahead.
Sorry, I don't have the same sort of experience at GDC that you guys did, because I just wasn't really paying attention to the big folks at GDC this year, and I feel like the whole conference is sort of every year becoming more and more about the Indie Games Festival and about all the people who are in town for that. And to me, like, that's the interesting thing, and all the people that I want to see, and it's like the exciting part, while the old big games industry sort of continues to do their little shows and stuff. I guess I did go see the guy who made Nobi Boy or whatever, which is pretty cool. But I don't know if you guys paid any attention to the Indie Games Festival stuff this year, but I felt like it was a big deal. I mean, it was a big deal last year, but this year it was a really big deal, and all the booths were packed with people, and they were getting press, all over the internet in ways that they haven't in previous years, and it just seems like it's sort of taking off in a cool way. I had the strangest experience of going to this thing on Friday night at the Giant Robot Art Gallery in San Francisco. They had an event where they sort of corralled all of these indie game makers with illustrators who have nothing to do with games, and they made these games just for the show, and so it was kind of like an art exhibit about these games, and everyone who was at the thing could have just walked out of like an Oakland warehouse art rock show or something. It was like a alternative version of the video game universe, full of like the hip and young and good looking, and there were like girls there. It was kind of amazing. It was a surreal experience. But yeah, I don't know. That was kind of the thing for me this week.
Did you see any especially interesting material that could lend itself to stories about the indie game scene?
As far as like just people that I met, or actual game stuff.
Well, just going there, I assume you go there as a writer and you're looking for potential stories. I mean, the difference between. When we used to go, I remember when I was first sent to GDC, maybe I don't want to blame the senior editors I had at the time, but I would kind of go there clueless. It'd be like, what am I supposed to do here? And I'd have like a certain notion of, okay, well, game coverage, this is 5 years ago as a preview or a review or a bit of news info or something. And I'd just be like, none of what I'm seeing is fitting that. And of course, later on, I'd appreciate that, like, even this weekend, I saw there's a ton of stories there, especially I think for people who are willing to have the patience to connect the dots and to sit in on a number of panels and then start to notice patterns developing and then to probe a little more. But it's like that's pretty much, antithetical to what a lot of people are going for. But like you, on the other hand, Robert, of course, I mean, I just assume that you're going there with an eye for stories. And it sounds like you were probing in, in the indie space. So I'm just curious, what you found there.
Yeah, I mean, I think the great thing about indie games that lends itself to writing a story about it is that you get total access to the people involved. And because they're such small productions, unlike a big game with 100 people on the team, a game made by one person is a reflection of that person's, personality and their interests, and it has this real direct human creative thing going on that it's so much easier and more fun to write about than to interview 5 of the guys from the core of 20 people who came up with all of the ideas that define a AAA gigantic game or whatever.
Right, and in some cases to have the interview with those 5 people mediated by multiple layers of PR.
Yeah, definitely. And to have like constantly people, shoving their agenda of what your story should be about at you,
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean that was the main sort of interest for me wasn't any sort of emerging trend in indie gaming as much as it was like, wow, all of these people are coming from pretty different places and they're all pretty different people. Like I spent a huge part of the week somehow always bumping into this guy Eskil Steenberg, who's you remember Sean from back when I wrote a story about this game about a year ago about his game Love. He's this really sort of mad scientist, kind of intense guy who has been hanging out in his apartment in Stockholm for 24 hours a day for a couple of years, trying to create a huge, massive multiplayer online game by himself. And he's a really interesting guy, and his game is really cool. But it was fun to walk around and see him interact with some of the other folks in the sort of indie gaming scene, because he's sort of a number cruncher, programming guru guy, and would sort of dumbfound people with all of his talk of generative programming and all these weird techniques he's using, while everyone else is just sort of thinking about pixel art. And so there are a lot of different levels of being a game maker on the indie scene. And people were sort of baffled by this character who was translucently white. He hadn't been in the sun for so long, and he had raccoon eyes. Someone had punched him in the eyes. So,
do you think for all the reasons that you're outlining that that indie games have it easy? I mean, and rightfully, so to the extent that it might be someone basically for working on it in their own time without hope of making a profit on it or something, but because you can identify with people, and because you can identify a single vision from a single person, and you have a level of access that is unusual sometimes among the bigger studios, that it's kind of easy to have the indie darlings, whereas we now have the big corporate monsters.
Yeah, oh for sure, and I think that comparison is so huge that it just forces you into cheering for the little guy. When you meet them and you find yourself invested in and wanting to see them succeed. Of course, you're not being the same critic that you are when you're playing the latest big sequel or whatever. And I think that's sort of weird. I think that there's a lot of press out there that treats the indie gaming community as their sort of a pet project. I think you become less of a critic and you become more of a I don't want to say promoter, but you're you become a cheerleader the more you get into that sort of thing.
Well, I just remember from the magazine biz when you would be looking at a small time game or an independent game, whatever it was, and if the developers, of course they want the press, they want the access, they want the exposure, but there were often cases that I found where the game was actually not good, and you would it would actually in a way hurt them. If we talked about it honestly, it would basically be don't support this piece of shit. And that doesn't do anybody any good. So in those cases, that would be something where we would just say, actually, you don't want press, and we're not going to support you yet. You know, you wouldn't be a dick about it, but you would just say, like, keep working on this thing, and, you know, we'll come back to us and we'll take another look at it.
Well, two things sort of come to mind from what Robert said. I mean, one is that, you know, it's fairly common practice in other media to champion, you know, for there to be critics that champion a movement that they see, you know, coming up. I mean, you know, it happened in film when you had the film brats in the 70s, like Spielberg and De Palma and Scorsese, and, you know, they were championed by critics like Pauline Kael. And, you know, I'm not as knowledgeable about contemporary art, but you saw the same thing in the art scene, you know, and people like Basquiat and other people were coming up, and the same thing in literature. So that's not as unusual a phenomenon. It's just sort of taken a while for the indie spirit to, I'd say, not come to games, but actually return. Because I think if you look at the origins of games, I mean, you look at some of the things, and you could have a crazy idea and get a couple of guys or just be yourself, and you would do the art and the sound and the music and all that stuff by yourself, and then the next thing you know, you had this game out, and, you know, the corporate machine, you know, doesn't work like that. But the other thing that comes to mind is that there are tremendously fascinating people, you know, who are in the corporate games machine, you know, people like a Will Wright or a Clint Hawking, you know, people like that. And what it makes me think, though, is that there are some people who either by force of personality or by the position they hold within their respective companies or whatever, they've gotten to the point where they can, if the journalist chooses, or they can just force it out there, they can engage you by force of personality and come across in ways, in things larger than just the game they're trying to sell. But, you know, if you look at it from the point of view of the publisher, and, you know, PR and marketing work for the publisher, is that it's not really to their benefit in a lot of ways that the developers as individuals get pushed, and their feelings about things beyond games or about other games in the genre or in the field, you know, really get published. It's really, the way they look at it, it's like a limited amount of time, a limited amount of outlets that they're trying to deal with, and they want people to stay on message as much as possible. The sad thing about that is that can often create less interesting journalism than if there were room to engage developers more. And now Eskel is, like, he'd be fascinating even if he was, you know, a tester at Activision, you know, but, you know, that's sort of what comes to mind.
To excuse the big dogs there, real quick, I would say that I totally agree that it's one thing to go to, if you go to see a game, you know, and most all of us have done cover stories, and that's like an opportunity where things tend to be really heavily mediated because it's the first look that the world's going to have, that the enthusiast world's going to have at a title. So they have a presentation and they go through, you know, a number of points, and what happens there is that doesn't necessarily, you know, preclude the reporter's ability to find his or her own story in that context. But for a lot of people, because the work is done for them, just out of sheer laziness or habit, it's not always just that, you know, the company's shoving a story down their throat, but that they just, you know, take what's the TV dinner that's prepared for them. You know, how many times have we all been to see, like, the second or third look at a game that we've already read a cover story on, and as we're sitting there in the presentation, we're like, why does this seem familiar? And then when we go back and we see that actually point by point, the cover story didn't even change the ordering of information in that presentation. It just entirely put it that way. And I know also from working, you know, with studios on the press side that it's not so carefully controlled. You know, you can go and they might have a carefully constructed story to present to you, but you're not going to be punished for basically getting off script and finding your own story there. So I think that goes both ways. You know, I mean, just the fact that it's there, that kind of speaks to the lazy devil on some people's shoulders, and they just go with it.
I think you also find in a lot of developers' cases, I'm speaking now as a press person, that when you went in and you asked interesting or different questions, they would be like surprised and happy because they, you know, it gets boring for them to be stuck on script too. And as long as they're not like saying anything they shouldn't be, or you know, just anything that could get them in trouble with their own bosses, they're usually happy to actually answer intelligent questions rather than how many weapons this level have. You know?
Exactly, and they'll write you about it afterward. Thank you. Go, Robert. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, Jeff's totally right about that. I mean, I can think of specific times of going to one of these events where, you've got these guys who flew in from England or something, and they've been sitting in a room in a hotel, like, jet-lagged for 6 hours, saying the same shit over and over again.
Right.
And you ask a real question, and their eyes become, like, unglazed, and they're like,
exactly.
oh, yeah, my brain.
So they become interested. I will say at the same time, too, that I think smart people on the publishing side will know that to journalists, ego is everything, and that if you make a reporter feel as though he or she is intelligent and that their opinion is especially valued for that fact, they're a lot easier to work with and have them say the things you ultimately want them to say. Now, I'm not saying it's totally manipulative, but I mean, it's been interesting to see that, like, my suspicions there were correct.
So wait, Sean, you're telling me that I all these years I haven't actually been asking especially good questions? They've been lying to me all the time.
Of us, but just in general. I mean, it's just right. I mean, if you have someone, I mean, just flattery is. I think people are universally susceptible to it, and you make someone feel, even if they basically wrote the same story everyone else did. And I'm not saying that you. I mean, personally, I could say no. I mean, I don't have to like be abstract or generic here. I totally love your writing, and Robertson's and Jeff's and everyone's as well. That
wait a second, you're flattering me now. I'm not gonna fall for that. You know I'm still writing my Edge column. You want me to say good stuff about your next game in my Edge column?
It's like in Robert's case, I assigned stories to him. I mean, now I was almost hurt that you don't remember, Robert, but I assigned you that original story on Escol, and that was one of the cases where, like, I said, hey, I have this lead here, and I was crossing my fingers that you would be interested in it,
I remember.
That's like a
I
total
remember that.
testament to my faith in in your ability to to actually go and do something proper.
Yeah, no, but like, the other thing that I wanted to say is that I think that when the big publishers with the big games do limit reporters to sort of access to details about the game and keep the personalities involved in the game sort of roped off, that they sort of shoot themselves in the foot because they take away all the things that might be interesting to a publication outside of gaming. They scrub away all of the human interest so that, like, if you wanted to write about these really interesting people making cool games in the games industry for a newspaper or a magazine that's not about video games, that you can't really find a good angle for that. I mean, I can't count the number of times that I've tried to pitch things and come up with stories about games only to sort of end up in these discussions with editors about where's the story about this, because we're just not that interested in the product,
right?
And
makes perfect sense.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, I think that it makes sense the way that they handle it for the enthusiast press.
Well, let's talk a little more though about the indie stuff that you did see, because unfortunately, because of a mix of 4 sessions that I was on and client work, I really didn't see much of the conference other than the sessions I was involved with. So I'd actually love to hear more about some of the stuff you saw.
Yeah, I mean, somebody's getting a call. Hello? No, just kidding. Yeah. What I saw was basically the stuff that has been going around before the show. Everything's been pretty much accessible. All the nominees for the IGF. The one game that I didn't get to play beforehand that I got to play there, that was really interesting. It was the game that won the grand prize. Won the $30,000 Samus McNally prize or whatever, was Blueberry Garden, which is another Swedish game. There seems to be like a totally indie thing happening in Sweden, because you've got Eskel, you've got that guy Cactus, who's sort of an indie darling, and then this I forget this guy's name. I can look at it right now. Eric Svedang or whatever. But Blueberry Garden is this really wild game that took me like 15 minutes just to get the sort of cause and effect relationship of the world. It's basically you are a character in this surreal garden where you can sort of eat these different fruits, and as you eat them, you get powers, almost like a Metroid game, where you eat this fruit and it lets you sort of fly, which lets you get to another place where you eat another fruit and it gives you another power that gives you access to another part of the world. The whole thing, though, is that as you're going through the world, sort of figuring out this puzzle, you're growing plants and sort of affecting the ecology of the world, and it has this really cool art style. Of course, most of these games are, that's sort of their appeal, is that they're nice to look at, but it's got this sort of these big white open spaces, and it looks very hand drawn and colorful. All the flowers growing up and around the world and stuff. But that's a pretty rockin' game, and from what I've heard, apparently because there's a lot of simulation going on in it, that the guy wanted to put it up on Xbox Live, but he says he can't run it on an Xbox. So I don't know how that's possible, that there's so much crazy shit going on in it, but he claims that you can only play it on a PC. So I don't know if anyone will actually get to see it. The other thing that I thought was interesting was to see how, a couple of years ago, Braid was sort of embraced by the press before it came out and became this sort of anointed indie game. Like this was going to be a great game, and this was the next big indie
right.
thing. And I felt like this year that happened to the game Fez, which is by a little small group called Polytron, and they didn't even have a game in the show this year. They showed it last year at IGF, but this year they were promoting it and like out there making friends with the press and passing out art and T-shirts and buttons and stuff, and they put up a new trailer. And I really felt like if you read the press around indie games at places like Take Source or Off-World or whatever, that game became the next sort of anointed indie god game, and we'll have to see what happens when it comes out, see if it actually follows through on people feel about it.
Did anyone happen to see a game called Achron? Chron?
No.
I've heard about it.
Akon locked up.
No, it's Steven from MTV Multiplayer. Was telling me a bit about it, and I really regretted not seeing it after he described it. And it was just that it was an RTS in which you're simultaneously playing past, present, and future. So that if say you come up into you're in a battle or something, and you realize that you're and forgive me if I get some of this wrong. This is a secondhand account now. If you were at a resource disadvantage or a technological disadvantage or something, you might be able to go back in time and rework some of your resource allocation so that suddenly there in the present battle, the changes are reflected and you're able to work. And then likewise, I don't know how this is the part that's interesting to me, how they handle the future stuff, because obviously they can't model a future that doesn't exist, especially for multiple players, unless they flub some stuff and they just decide in advance that there are certain things that are going to be true. So I was hoping to hear more about that. It seemed pretty interesting to me.
I didn't get to see that. I didn't see that on the. Well, it wasn't entered in the competition, was it? Was it just
no? I think it was just some people that were bringing it. What about Bone Town?
I didn't see that either. Man, you're hipper than.
I'm not. Bone Town is like a porno game that the developers were there. And I don't know what they were there for. And it's like, it's done, it's packaged. It wasn't, as far as I could tell, it wasn't for promotion. I just don't understand. But yeah, Bone Town on the back, it has, it's just another game about, fucking people and doing drugs. And there's, it's just.
I think I remember picking up a link to a trailer from your pile of links.
I did. Yes, I did post a trailer for it a while. Like the cover for the game is interesting. It's got a guy holding a bong up in one hand and then a sparking android leg in the other, and I don't understand why. And then he's standing on like a pile of like women in sexually provocative poses.
Sounds fucking awesome. Did you guys happen to check out the OnLive thing?
That's like the big talk of the. I think that's probably like the biggest talk of the show, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I had a demo.
It's basically.
I had a demo
Yeah, it's
in
basically
New York.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I had a demo in New York a couple of weeks ago, and it was the talk of the show. It was the talk of the lunch with luminaries, which is this thing that Dave Perry of former Shiny and Earthworm Jim and MDK fame puts on, where the idea is he gets a number of prominent developers and people in the industry together for a lunch and invites a handful of media, and the luminaries talk. The journalists don't get to ask any questions, but they can. It's all for public consumption. They can record the conversation.
They really call themselves luminaries?
Well,
So wait, they call them, a group of people, this little club gets together and calls themselves luminaries.
Well,
and invite
alliterative.
a select boys club.
well,
And then you have to
Didn't we
sit
do
there
that?
and bask in the gloriness and the glory of their luminosity.
Yeah,
Maybe
I-
we can change our podcast name to the Luminaries.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the title of this particular one. Last time it was Circle Jerk. Today it's Luminaries.
What's a famous constellation with 5 stars in it?
Orion the Hunter.
the League of Extraordinary Luminaries. So the people, well, I should talk about it a little bit. So the people that were there, you guys can tell me how luminarious you think they are. So it was Will Wright, Brian Fargo, Dave Perry, Neil Young, Rob Pardo, and Warren Spector. And the lineup sort of changed a bit from last year. Last year, Phil Harrison was there. That was where he made the comment about being frustrated that Sony PlayStation as a whole didn't push his whole social gaming stuff further. But he wasn't there this year. And Gary Whitta was, I guess, former editor of PC Gamer, was the host. And he's doing quite well for himself in Hollywood, actually. He has this movie called The Book of Eli, which was a spec script that he wrote, and it's being filmed by the Hughes brothers, who did Menace to Society and American Pimp and From Hell. Less said about From Hell, the better, but they're talented
Starring
directors.
Denzel Washington.
Starring Denzel Washington and Gary Oldman. It's a post-apocalyptic Western.
So can I
This
ask
is a guy who he was the editor-in-chief of PC Gamer magazine. For
Yeah.
you don't know.
So there's
Can I ask something real fast?
Sure.
Like, what the fuck was Neil Young doing there?
No, not that Neil Young.
Not Heart of Gold.
Okay, I'm like, what?
Yeah, actually, every time it was his turn on the mic, he just started going, "Oh, to live on, go to the mountains." I know my thing about singing this week is, no, there's a different Neil Young who actually is he still at EA?
No, he's he left EA to found Ngimoco, which is the iPhone
Right.
game company. So if John Davison were on this podcast with us, he'd be no doubt talking about an Ngimoco game or some other iPhone game. But
By the way, if you ever meet Neil Young, this gaming industry Neil Young, and want to really annoy him, make some kind of Neil Young joke right away.
I'll do it.
Where's Crazy Horse?
There you go. Yeah, because he's never heard that.
ever. So
Well, I don't know. In the back of my mind, I thought maybe Neil Young was like getting into the video gaming business or something. You know, shit like that happens, and I was having a hard time picturing it. But
If he does, Robert, he'll be a luminary.
he will be a luminary.
instant luminary. Yeah, so they talked about a number of things, but obviously On Live was on everyone's mind, especially because Dave Perry, after the news about, so there was an embargo on the release of the news about On Live, which is this cloud gaming service. The idea now is that rather than the bulk of the hardware that makes your games run being in your living room, it's in the cloud, like servers that are running, souped up hardware. And the games actually run on these massive server farms, and what they're sending to you in your living room, and this could be on a Mac, it could be on a PC, and it could be running on what they call a micro console. So it's a small box that looks like, those zip drives, kind of, and it's got a HDMI port and, other things coming out of it. But the idea is that the hardware can be much simpler and less expensive. They're talking about definitely sub $150, maybe even sub $100 for this micro console. And the reason it's so simplified because, again, the games are really running on these servers. And what the servers do is they send the images from the game down to they compress the images down, send them to your living room, whether it's your PC, your Mac, or this micro console, and then the input, like you pressing the A button or the X button or moving your analog stick, you make those moves, those get compressed and sent back up to the server, and it's going back and forth, and so your game exists in the cloud, and that allows them to do a lot of really cool stuff, assuming it works in the wild. Obviously, in the demo situation, the stuff works really well. But the things that you can sort of do is you can sort of spectate on friends' games in progress because they're like streams. So you can just sort of like pop in and watch a stream, and their interface, like imagine like a 4x4 or 5x5 grid, and each of the squares has video from a different game running, and so you can sort of jump in and spectate. The games start pretty instantly. So there's all these kind of cool things you can do with it. But anyway, the embargo got broken by Variety, so everyone rushed to get their stories out. And Dave Perry apparently has been working on something similar. So he rushed out news of his thing. And so everyone was sort of talking about, could this thing work? What were the implications for the industry? What were the implications for Microsoft, Sony, and Nintendo? So that's sort of like my attempt at a précis of what was going on with OnLive.
Did people talk about the Phantom that much when it was announced?
Well, in fairness, they did. But in fairness, the Phantom, if I'm not mistaken, was not quite the same thing, because the Phantom was really electronic delivery. Like they had a hard drive, I believe, and the games were going to be resident. It was just you were going to download them and run them on the Phantom. But I mean, if you're talking about
it was like a closed PC platform, the Phantom. It was
exactly.
Like it was for playing PC
Right.
games on TV. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess my point with the Phantom isn't the technological parallels between the two, but the likelihood of either of them working.
I would say that I don't know that OnLive is going to be the thing to do it, but the idea of like games being played on the cloud, I think, is like pretty much inevitable.
Right.
I don't know.
I agree with that, but
Yeah.
but technologically, we are years upon years for it being feasible, especially to spec that they've already described.
Yeah, and to think that we're going to sit around and play like Crysis on it is really, it just doesn't seem like I don't see how you could afford, like, putting aside like the network kind of issues and having the internet that it takes to play something like Crysis in a decent way, to play like a mouse like first person shooter game.
Right.
I don't understand how they could afford to have the kind of hardware to deliver up Crysis to everyone who wants to play it.
That's the kind of thing, though. It's like it would have to be, it's kind of chicken and egg. Like assuming it's super successful, the question is, okay, how are you? Well, say it has 20,000 subscribers or something. Or how are you delivering all these different games to them at once? But then it's kind of like, well, if you have that many people, we assume you're successful enough to get the infrastructure up to support that, right?
Well, those are sort of two sort of different points, right? So I think, Robert, you're absolutely right. Like, what is required on the back end? Like, is it a one-to-one correspondence? So whatever souped-up machine that someone has that runs Crysis at full frame rate, do they need effectively one of those machines for each person who runs it? If that's the case, then that does get expensive pretty quickly, one would think. But the other one about how do they like playing all of those games, I mean, it's just data. Like, it's imagery going down, being compressed and going down. It's like the same. It's like what they're claiming is it's a more advanced, better version of what goes, of what listening to streaming audio or watching streaming video. You have the stuff that comes down the pipe, which is literally imagery along with some, positional information. But that's, and then what's going back is your inputs, and it's being computed. Now, that latency and lag absolutely is an issue, but the stuff that's happening, just like what's going down and coming back up, that doesn't seem that complicated to me.
So we should probably let Luke say something, because while you're talking, he's like chatting, all kinds of. He's chatting like equations at us about why this thing is breaking the laws of the universe or some shit.
He's quoting what's his name from Lost?
Some guy, one of our engineers, because we actually talked about this a lot at work this week, and not to like poo-poo anything, too harshly. I mean, Eurogamer did a pretty good job of that already. To spec they're saying 1 millisecond of latency, and that information has to travel at the speed of light. It's like roughly like 300 kilometers. So every client has to be 300 kilometers from these data centers to provide information in this legless environment. Like this is the cloud system, like Robert was saying, is really awesome and could be really amazing, and in fact could make everyone more money and provide a better experience. But the technology does not exist yet to do it to the spec that's being described currently.
Right. So it's still fascinating. I mean, even for those that will insist that no, this is totally practical, it's fascinating because I think most of us do suspect that here's a look at the future. You know, it's just how far out is that future, and then and agree with what Robert said that. Which company ends up doing it, who knows, right? It's like when people first started talking about useful internet search, you know, no one would have pinned Google at the time as being the one, you know. I mean, I'm sure long lost to me now, but, you know, some of the original search engines and stuff are like, oh, this is a fantastic idea, but is this practical? You know, I mean, how much data they're talking about sorting and processing.
Well, and I think
it's...
I think that's what's interesting about something like this is that if and when it does come to fruition, you're no longer limited to Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo, because in fact, if that's the future, then you would say like, well, are Sony or Nintendo actually the best position to deliver something like that to you? You know, Microsoft might be because of the investment in Live. But you would actually say, like, maybe Google is in a better position to bring that to you. Or
cable giants, you know, Comcast.
Exactly. But I think...
I don't think that kills the platforms, though. Like, I think actually the platforms could survive after the fact just based on, you know, the way that they create communities for developers and for players and stuff. I mean, maybe it becomes more like, you know, the competition between Steam and... you know, the other folks trying to deliver that kind of service on computers, but it would be surprising, you know, if we quickly got rid of if it basically all became PC gaming or something. I would be surprised, especially with, you know, Nintendo out there trying to do interface stuff. Like they could continue to sort of sell the idea that the main idea is, I mean, the main thing with their games is how you interact with them, and the cloud isn't going to change that, you know.
Which is part of what was surprising about about OnLive's positioning of it. So I think there's some things that are super smart about the positioning of it. So when you remember GameTap, when GameTap came out, you know, publishers were not giving them frontline titles, and the implication by showing the publisher support list that they put out and what they're saying is that, you know, they could obviously get catalog games. They could get old Sega games and old Nintendo games and things like that. But what they're focused on is new games because the positioning is like this is a console competitor, and you know you can have this stuff in your living room day and date with this other stuff. GameTap couldn't do it when they shipped, but now you look at where Steam has gotten, where you know they get a number of games day and date with their retail release, and you see that the environment has changed. And obviously, publishers are very interested because if this stuff does work and if it does take off, whether it's on Live or someone else, it addresses a lot of their concerns about piracy, about secondhand sales, and all of these other things. But that said, you know, the Wii, I mean, they just announced that they hit 50 million units of Wii shipped. That's more than 360 and PS3 combined, yet the controller, their proprietary controller they showed, and I believe it will work in a wired fashion with 360 and PS3 controllers, but the wireless controller, their own, when they showed, it looks like an Xbox 360 controller. You know, they haven't done any advancements in interface. They're not doing any first party. So the games that will distinguish them would have to be, you know, I don't even know if they're pursuing exclusivity deals, but they've definitely not designed their own games. And with the Wii being far and away in first place, and they've shown nothing that addresses that revolution, I'm trying to understand, like, you know, who exactly are they going after? Like, I mean, other than Mac gamers who have been left behind and would be like, hey, now I can play PC games on my Mac.
I mean, hopefully, what it could do is allow these, you know, allow the sort of, you know, expensive hardware games that hardcore gamers use to be within the grasp of people who are, you know, not into spending that amount of money on gaming. You know, to make the top tier technology stuff, you know, a little more widely available, so that it's not ghettoized by the Wii. You know. even though I guess price point isn't that big of an argument since they still charge like what $250 for a Wii.
I was
totally
surprised to hear the list of major publishers that have expressed interest or declared, that they would be willing to work with OnLive. And the only major omission I noted on that, it was Activision, but it included, EA, Ubisoft, just about everyone.
Valve wasn't there.
Valve wasn't there. That made me curious though, because it was like when it's kind of like now I'm thinking maybe publishers are like, we understand that these things are rapidly changing, and in the past it hasn't been in our interest to take the wait and see approach, in the way that everyone did with Steam. Remember our first Steam, like there's very, very little on there, and then it just became an avalanche relatively quickly in the past few years. And now it's like, well, what are they going to lose, right? If they only get 5,000 subscribers, what's the big deal? I mean, they're not going to lose money that way. So like it seems like, hey, let's find out who's going to own this space. Something I wanted, unless you guys really want to continue on the subject.
No.
Do you?
No, I'm done.
Okay. Something I ended up getting in a discussion with while I was at GDC. This is more about Resident Evil 5. I mean, the game's been talked about a whole lot, but I kind of wanted to get this out there because Steven Totila from MTV Multiplayer Guide, I know he played at least the first half of Resident Evil 5 cooperatively with you and Guy, and I was at dinner with him, and he also posted something to the same effect on his site, that he just thinks that the game is much better when played solo. And the first thing I was like, well, wow, that's like a pretty, damning condemnation of N-Guy, that you'd rather play with the AI than.
Well, Sean, I think my very presence with that particular game may have made him uncomfortable.
Yeah, so you think it was a lot of that, just feeling extra uncomfortable?
Oh no, I see what you did there. Oh yeah.
Maybe he thought you were going to attack him like a zombie.
Oh man, I wasn't expecting that. It went right over me. To be fair, to do my best to present Steven's point of view fairly, he was insisting that. Well, this is actually kind of what I didn't understand. His main argument, as I understood it, for the game being more enjoyable single player, was that you guys got to this boss, and then here I guess I should say, here's a spoiler alert for anyone listening. We'll mark this. It gets to a boss, and you have to. One player needs to use a flamethrower on it, and the other player needs to work in concert to attack weak spots that emerge as the thing is set on fire. And you, as he tells it, neither of you could make heads or tails of what was happening, and just basically got exasperated and gave up. In his account, when he played on his own, he was able to give the flamethrower one of the tools to the AI, Shiva, and she was able to show him the way. And so his whole argument there is that, this is a fantastic way to dynamically adjust the difficulty of combat and puzzles by allowing the player to allocate different roles to the AI. And what I heard there...
Yeah, but have you seen that guy play Street Fighter?
I have, and he confesses to sucking serious ass at that game. Sorry, guy, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say. So, in fairness, I think there are a few things that are getting conflated. You're mostly right, but it's conflating a few things. So, one is that the part he's talking about, there's sort of two parts where you encounter in the game where you encounter that boss or a variant of that boss. Another spoiler alert. So the first time it's in this room that has like a blast furnace. Yes. And then the second time you encounter is where you have the flamethrowers. The first time, I mean, we might have been confused about positioning, but I'd actually played that level before. I was sort of deliberately, I didn't want to spoil it for him. So and I just didn't tell him that. So he may have been having a very different experience from me, but I'd actually played that part of the game at a demo event with Capcom. So I actually knew what I was doing. He just didn't know what he was doing, which is not surprising because he was coming to it the first time. But I have his review. I mean, I have the part of his multiplayer post where he talks about why he prefers playing it solo, and there were a couple of things, right? So he says, the scarier way to play it is solo. He says, I was never afraid when playing RE5 co-op. I could always assume that the second player and guy playing as Sheva could handle his own problems and, when needed, get me out of a jam. But when he played by himself, he says he felt pressure. And then he says the other reason solo RE5 is more haunting when played solo is because it's more quiet. It's an obvious point, but a key one. Like with no one to talk to, you'll more effectively hear the score that's designed to manipulate you into feeling terror. So those are some of the things he's talking about.
So for me,
Go ahead.
You go, Jeff. You go, Jeff.
Well, I was just going to say that that you can equate that, I think, very easily to a movie experience, especially when you're talking about a horror movie. I mean, I don't know if you guys have the same experience, but watching a horror movie by myself is much more disconcerting than it is when you're watching with a friend and you're talking and you're commenting on it and you're making jokes about it. You're less immersed, I think.
Is it scarier watching it alone than it would be to watch it with your wife or your daughter, assuming one of them is a little more like prone to, sort of fear reaction than you?
I think so. I think it would be scarier alone because with them, then I'm going to be sort of more in a alpha role of making sure the ladies aren't too scared. Whereas if I'm by myself, I can just be my own girl,
So most of the points, those make sense with, the discussion we had over dinner, but he was really big on the whole point about, and I see where he's getting at, but the idea that, you can, by having these other partners and being able to allocate different roles to them, you can play to your own strengths and then, let them handle your weaknesses. And I mean, and that's cool, and people have tried that all the way, even well before, the disastrous, what was Brute Force for the original Xbox. And to an extent, it's the same, thinking that applies to Halo when you decide if you're going to man the gun on the back of a Warthog or if you're going to be driving the Warthog. And that's totally cool to me. But, it was funny to hear because, I was sitting there with Don Norbury, who's one of our programmers, and, from our point of view, we were like, the real problem is that there was insufficient feedback on the boss. You should never have gotten to the point where you had to throw up your hands and say, I need this to be solved for me, because, it technically should be a lot more rewarding to figure out this on your own, right? Say, and I'm sure the way they designed it is that you're running around and you're supposed to be scared. The point is not that you immediately know how to handle this frightening, boss encounter before you even begin it, which is, I think, the problem with the very beginning one. But that you're running around like a chicken without a head and then still keeping your cool enough that you are paying attention to what's happening and seeing what is effective against this thing and what isn't. But the whole argument really strike me as another version of it's better to have sex with blow-up dolls than real women because you can't get an STD from the blow-up doll, or the blow-up doll isn't going to complain it has a headache or something.
Wow.
The trade-off is so immense to me that I really felt that way. It's the tension. I mean, it is subjective. I totally admit that. At the end of the day, the enjoyment you have, you can always rationalize it afterward and say, oh, well, the game's not supposed to be terrifying. It's supposed to be an action game.
So you're admitting that it's subjective.
High stress.
You're admitting that it's subjective, that it's better whether or not it's better to have sex with a real woman as opposed to a blow-up doll.
I would have to say that's subjective. It has to be on the purpose. There's going to be someone on the internet, and I bet if I did a quick search now, I could find some dude with a couple teeth telling me that his real doll is a better bet than a real woman.
A lot of people want to know why I got real dolls instead of just getting a prostitute. Well, a lot of reasons for that. Sometimes you'll go up there, you'll go get a prostitute, she'll carry you up to the room, y'all both get naked thinking you'll get sex, and some big dude will come out the room with a gun or a baseball bat and rob you. And then you'll be left nothing. Another thing about prostitution. Yeah, AIDS, syphilis, gonorrhea, venereal, all kinds of venereal diseases. And once you get one of something like AIDS, or once you get a disease like that, there's no getting rid of it. And Brooke was $5,700. Kelly was $6,300 because she was newer. And really, when it comes to your health, can you really put a price on that? I mean, say you're saving $6,300, but you're paying $50, so you still saving $5,800. Well, if you come down with some kind of disease, what are you saving? It's going to cost you your life in the end. So no, I'll take the real dolls any day.
So because he exists, he proves that it's subjective. The very existence of that toothless man and his real doll.
Checkmate.
So But yeah, just like I much more enjoy, the tension of, I mean, yes, you're talking, you could talk shit and be silly, but then the next minute, Robert and I were doing this. We'd spend 1 minute laughing in the face of an enemy that was just fucking preposterous. And then the next minute, just kind of like, dude, hit the trapper, jump up here, hurry up, give me some ammo, don't die. Or like, you get to the moment where you're like, fuck, dude, I'm going to die. And you sort of like lose hope. And then all of a sudden you get excited again because you realize you're just barely going to escape, the situation.
Well, this suggests something really interesting. So before I get into it, I want to ask you a question for you and Robert. So was the only way that you guys played the game from beginning to end? Was it co-op, or did you at all play it solo?
I played the entire thing cooperative, but then I played a few in between, like while I was waiting for Robert, to get back online or something, because we have the East Coast, West Coast time to divide. Right. I would go and do some of the levels we had already played to get a little bit of extra loot and stuff. And I mean, the trade-off of having, because Steven would admit, he's like, yeah, you got to take all your weapons away from her because she'll waste ammunition and stuff, but you basically give her the healing stuff and she'll heal you when you need it. That's fantastic. And it was like, that's horrible for me, I mean,
that's such a misogynistic way for Steven to play the game, but
it totally is, and he needs to like come and face that fact.
But the reason I was asking was how well do you guys feel like you tracked the story elements of RE5 when you were playing the game co-op?
Oh, especially the written stuff.
Yeah.
You talking about the documents? Not at all.
The documents and just sort of cutscenes even or whatever. I'm just sort of like, how well do you feel like you tracked it playing it co-op?
I tracked it about as well as I normally track it in a Resident Evil game, which is to say that I actively avoid paying attention to the story. And I don't read the documents, and I go for a beer when the cutscene comes on, and then I get screwed when it turns into a QuickTime event. Yeah, I just so don't care about that game in that way that it's funny to me, and so it was super enhanced for me to be playing it with Sean because it was someone else who could laugh at how stupid it was.
See, the crazy thing, Robert, was when Enga was mentioning that Steven was confused in the first encounter with the Ouroboros. That was the one that, remember, it was just like patently transparent before we even triggered the thing. And remember when we walked in and I'm like, hey, let's go trigger the boss because we know the solution now.
Oh, the fire.
Neither of us even knew the boss for certain existed. So that's like more of a bigger issue about, I don't know if we intend to talk about it this podcast or not, but just the whole notion of, training players to understand the systems of your games. And I thought that was a case of like really heavy hand. I'm not questioning whether or not it was wise, but I mean, it was, from my point of view, very heavy-handed training so that only, no one was going to be left behind there. So it is almost like it's, and then you're saying like if Steven was left behind there, it's not to knock him, but it really just goes to show you that there's like a great deal of subjective variety in players' experience and the extent to which they grasp or don't grasp things. And I imagine, when you're making a game, that's a huge challenge. You get something and you're like, this is so obvious. And then, like here, I don't even have to use our own experience. I could say again at GDC when I was at the panel for the some of the ways that they tracked information during the construction of Halo 2 and 3. They put this photo up of one of the designers just basically smashing the palm of his hand against his forehead, and they explained that what he was doing was watching someone play his level and just wander back and forth, unable to find the way forward, when in his mind it was, like the breadcrumb trail was as obvious as could possibly be,
Well, we're going to talk about...
I can tell you that at my job, I'm spending a lot of my time doing that very thing. And I'm watching playtest after playtest, both with kids who are the demographic and adults. And it is a huge development conundrum when you're trying to tune puzzles and gameplay with, your demographic in mind, but also, I mean, you can't even say what that, can a 12-year-old beat that puzzle? That's an impossible thing to say because there's smart 12-year-olds and there's moronic 12-year-olds.
Yeah, as if all 12-year-olds were created alike.
Well, and that's something we're going to...
So watching these playtests is just amazing because you'll see someone breeze through something in 5 seconds without thinking about it, and you'll watch someone else spend an hour until they start, yelling at the screen and wanting help.
So, and guy?
Yeah, no, I was going to say absolutely. I mean, that's something that we've talked about getting into in a future podcast. Is that the fact that all games teach, and how well do you teach? And like, Sean, you were a teacher, and if you've got a class, there are people of varying abilities, and how do you teach to the middle? Do you teach to the top? Like, how do you work with all of them? And so as a game, I mean, Steven's like a very thorough gamer. He plays a lot of games through to completion, certainly more than I do. But he might be super smart at one game and super dumb at another, and that goes for all of us. And like, how do you now, who are working on the development side, how do you sort of tap, like, how do you hit all of those different people, with your games? But the reason I was really pushing on the difference between like where the co-op and the story and how much of it you caught and tracked or cared about or didn't is that the developers spend a lot of time and effort and money on their campaign. They spend a fair amount of resources on the story elements and things like that. And in co-op, there's a lot of that will get lost because of the nature of that interaction. It's kind of like when if I want to go see a movie and like hear the dialogue, I know, like for a popular movie, I know not to go to Times Square. Like Times Square is for when I want that like full-on audience participation kind of thing. And co-op is kind of that thing. And even between when Halo 3 launched and where we are right now, like it'll be interesting to see what happens when the next Halo ships, because I think the appetite for co-op has increased tremendously, and that's now that it makes me think, like looking at part of why Steven was saying he liked playing this game solo better is thinking about how spot on Valve was with what they did with Left 4 Dead. It doesn't really have a story. It's like you can build up a story from what it is you're doing, what it is your friends do, the graffiti on the wall, the barks of the character, but they're throwing you into a situation so you don't lose anything if you play it co-op.
Well, let's say this, though. Is the story in Resident Evil obligatory in any real sense, aside from what Robert pointed out, is that there are QTEs and that sometimes force you to watch the cutscene? But
it's not.
On the other hand, all the documentation's optional. So if it has no more of a story at the end of the day than a level of a playthrough of like Dead Air in Left 4 Dead, is it really that big of a difference? You know what?
I think RE5 would have been RE5 is a very interesting game in a lot of ways. So this statement might not be true, but they could have imagined the resources they could have devoted in other areas if they had designed it with that understanding from the beginning that the story here really doesn't matter, and we're going to design it in a very, very different way. It would have probably been. The only reason I'm just going to be contrarian here is that cutscenes are generally, I think, they're perfectly suited for group viewing, especially we're not talking about watching, I don't know, some fantastic movie or something here. Usually, for the most part, the cutscenes in Resident Evil are just guys doing Matrix moves, things blowing up, and it's not to my detriment to be making a snarky comment while I'm watching that. I'm not missing like a moment in 2001: A Space Odyssey or something, or some subtle.
It's Grindhouse.
And for me, like the big problem is the text thing, because that is like anathema to that's not suited for when you have people in that context to stop and say, I'm going to ignore you. I'm going to ignore the rest of the world in its entirety and stare at this log. But I don't think that means that in general, because that didn't work there, that means we have to write off narrative in cooperative. I'd say that maybe there are other ways so that you can present this information in a way that one player gets it and feels that they can't help but share it with someone else. It came to them in a way that didn't, that wasn't as I just described, and it had information that was like exciting and relevant to what was happening, so that they wanted to share it, or a way that they could both get it at the same time that wasn't just a cutscene or wasn't clicking through the pages of a virtual log,
Like, say, an audio log?
No, and I'm definitely not talking about anything we're working on here. I'm just saying, that's no bullshit. Like, I'm just saying, yeah. When we did that, right? It's like who's going to sit there and read that thing while I'm going to go and get a bunch of ammo and go, get a bunch of kills, and maybe I'll pick up the next weapon when you're not looking, because you're reading about why these people actually have a history and they're not just a bunch of freaky mutants and stuff. So, that was a problem, especially with that game, because that's exactly where they tried to place their humanizing effort, was in these logs that no one's.
I gotta say, I gotta say also, I enjoy the story of Left 4 Dead more than I enjoy the story of Resident Evil 4. I find the sort of emergent thing that happens with the characters and the things they say to each other and the sort of the environment itself to be a lot more interesting. Like I just mainly feel like I prefer stories when they're not so written. You know,
Right.
Resident Evil is so overwritten. And you could just imply so much. I don't need to know all the answers to the questions that pop into my head as I'm playing that game. In fact, I think it would be better if a lot of that stuff was kind of mysterious.
Yeah, I
don't
agree.
need.
Like,
Yeah.
in some cases, yeah, it's better to not encourage you to probe too much, because you're always going to get to the point where you're like, why did this guy just turn into the uvula of fucking Leviathan? You know, like whatever the case is in that game.
Yeah.
Sorry, back there somewhere. I feel like end guy got cut off. I'm sorry.
No. I'd said exactly that. I mean, I'm sort of thinking through now, you know, based on what you're saying, and I definitely, the idea wasn't so much rejecting narrative. I think it's really more like the effect of co-op on games that are, to use Robert Ashley's phrase, like very written. I think developers are grappling with that and struggling with that. And I think the popularity, I mean, all the reasons, Sean, that you were insisting that why co-op is the superior way to play it, I think they're all true. And I think we'd all probably agree, like, look, almost no matter even how good your story is, the essence of a game is the mechanics, the gameplay, and how you interact with the systems that the game offers. And what I'm just sort of thinking about is that if co-op is going to be a major focus of the game, or even the way increasingly large numbers of people are going to experience it, then I think that sort of necessitates a very different approach to the written parts of the story.
Luke, you've been silent here. I know we none of us here that you know are speaking on behalf of our employers or you know anything really about what we do. But I mean, just give you the opportunity if you wanted to say something, because people have been playing Halo cooperatively for a long time now, and I assume that there's a whole lot of thought on how that works.
I think the stuff that you guys have said about developers wrestling with how to treat narrative and story in a cooperative environment. Actually, just to use Halo 3 as a case study, one of the bugs that was punted extremely late in Halo 3's development was if you're playing in co-op, the Cortana messages that you get still occur. And it just was a technical constraint to get them out of the game as late in the process as we wanted to. And that's a really good example, I think, of a suboptimal experience with narrative in a co-op game where, like, you know, you're running around and your buddy crosses the trigger volume that says, you know, interrupt everyone with this message. And I think solo, that's fine and makes sense. But when you're just running through the game, like, you know, probably just shooting the shit with your friends, the last thing you need is, like, this woman popping up on your screen and nagging you and reminding you that she needs to be found. And I think that was actually a really interesting, especially in line with what I think it was N Guy just was saying. Like, that was a really good example of, like, yeah, maybe that's not so important in co-op. And you know, I think that we definitely learned a lot from that, and we definitely, you know, we all are playing. We've all spent a ton of time playing Left 4 Dead, and I think that Left 4 Dead's a really good example of how to do things well. And to jump all the way back, actually, to the GDC thread, their talk on creating replayable cooperative experiences was actually really interesting, in that they outlined their technique, which I think the techniques that they use, especially with the enemy design, are, I mean, pretty apparent. But then hearing the way that they talked about it was really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
What did they say?
Oh God, I have to dig through the notes. They talked about how different types of enemies were introduced to function like antithetically to how players would otherwise expect to play. Like, there are the enemies that you see first and you have to kill instantly. Then there's the enemy like the boomer that you see and you don't want to kill it right away because you want to kill it when it can't barf on you or, like, explode on your friend. There's stuff like the witch, again, is another example of, like, let's mix the rules up on the players, and it's just stuff like that that you know while playing because the game teaches it to you, and as you know, and mostly you probably learn the hard way the first time, but and that's sort of part of learning.
And that's what's interesting about that is that with bosses, I mean, I mean, it's the same principle that boss characters work on, which is that you have to use the tools at your disposal in a different way. There are now patterns that you have to observe that are different from the way you play it through. But what's great about the bosses in Left 4 Dead is that they require you to change your behavior, but they still work off the same base mechanics in a way that a lot of games don't. Like, you have to really radically change your behavior, or it's this thing that you have to do 3 times, you know. And it's sort of like the bosses in Left 4 Dead felt less arbitrary to me.
I actually don't want to level too heavy of a hand at it, but there was a particular boss in Metal Gear 4 last year. I think the Vamp encounter. I don't know if anyone else played it, but you had to do something crazy with a syringe that I recall being explained to probably like 7 cutscene hours earlier in the game, and I killed the boss like a million times with guns, and he kept coming back, and then I finally was like, I'm sending Ryan Payton an email, and I'm checking GameFAQs, and then but that's a really interesting example of not being taught well, and then like N-Guy started to say, like, having to completely change your experience to fight a boss, or to change the way that you've mechanically been doing things all along to fight a boss, that maybe is not a great way of doing things.
That Vamp encounter.
I think we all know, though, that's like a time-honored tradition, unfortunately, of boss battle creation, right? Is that it's going to be some kind of unfair new combination of things to do, or even brand new things to do that you haven't seen before until then, and the only way to actually figure out how to do it is to die a few times.
That's just shitty, though. Like, that's the opposite of, like, say, a Zelda dungeon is nothing but an extended tutorial for a boss encounter, or like Dead Space. I've mentioned this, in some other context. Most of the game is an extended tutorial, and makes sense to a degree for a boss encounter where. So they introduced the idea that there are these that there are tentacles, and that they're the tentacles that have a weak spot that you can blow up. Then they introduce what it's like to be in zero gravity, or to be in an environment with no oxygen. And then what happens is they gradually start to combine these things. And then when you go to the boss, it's like, the final exam. And it specifically uses only elements that you've been taught to use in isolation, or in some combination. But Vamp is just like that. I was going to say, it's like, they conceptually prefaced it by giving you the story notion of what this guy's weakness is and what his immunities are. But like Luke was saying, from a game mechanic point of view, there was nothing on hand to even indicate that these were verbs available to you. And in a game,
and just the way that you had to use the serum was so ridiculous. I remember that because I had to look it up. Like, it's the only time in the entire game you use this one item. Right. And the way that you use it is you're fighting this really tough guy, and you have to go like right up to him and click this menu item, and it feels very like wrong.
It's essentially as though like a new button magically appeared on the back of your controller that you weren't aware of during that encounter, and then when you go to GameFAQs and it points it out, and you flip your controller over and you see that there it was, even though it didn't exist.
And that's
I actually kind of like. The traditional, boss battle thing where you do come upon a boss where the rules change in drastic ways, as long as it's something you can figure out fairly quickly. Like, I feel like Sean and I maybe died once during a boss battle in Resident Evil 5. Like, I can't remember boss battles where we had to do it over and over again.
Dude, we died in all the fucking QuickTime events because of you.
Oh, fuck that. That was you, man.
I just have to say about that one negative thing I could say. Well, it's not the one negative thing I can say, but the one I'm going to say about that game is that, like, if the cutscene is supposed to be a palate cleanser, where you're like, okay, wipe your hands off. You just dealt with all this stuff. Now just enjoy some, like, Matrix era kung fu anime or whatever, and then like you get killed for it and you have to watch it again, and suddenly it's like, I mean, I know I can't say it any other way than it's been said 100 times before, but just I want to join that chorus and say, I don't understand why, and I blame you, Robert. You're the one that made us watch it again and again.
It wasn't me. Well, we are like, we're just we had all these plans to talk about using this book, The Female Brain, go into a discussion about
that would ultimately encompass Ryan Scott's recent marriage and what he can expect. But we definitely don't have time to do that this week. So we'll save that for a forthcoming show. But that's fine because they'll give me more time to actually prepare, and like I can send some stuff your way to like give you a better sense of where that's going to go.
I'm afraid of.
We can tell Ryan Scott congratulations, though.
Yes, congratulations.
I'm afraid that 5 guys sitting around talking about the female brain is going to be really scary.
I agree.
That's
I mean, especially for some of you who are in long-term and loving and thriving relationships, and that's what I want to talk about are those. But I mean, I just I don't want.
The only thing that comforts me is knowing that there won't be a single girl out there listening to this.
That's true.
That's not true. I've got messages from some female listeners.
Okay, there are 5 female listeners, maybe.
They're very important.
So that's one for each of us.
We should have out of the game ladies' night where we offer like special drink specials if you come and listen to Out of the Game.
I think that we should just release
Download
t-shirts.
your download rate.
Girl t-shirts.
Oh,
Only release baby doll sizes.
God.
Oh man. Do you mind if I take us out on a story? I'll try to make it quick.
Yeah.
Do it.
Okay.
Bring us home.
While all of your wives and girlfriends are in the background telling you to get the fuck off the computers. I didn't mention this before, but I went to Atlantic City. It's now like 3 weeks ago or so. I can avoid the part about how Atlantic City is a cesshole, but when we were there, I decided I wanted to see a magic show because we got a free flight there and we had extra money for shows and stuff, and I don't gamble. So I went to go see a magic show, and this guy playing there is named Kozak the Magician. And it turns out that actually, let me start this first. So we're trying to find where in the Tropicana the box office is to buy tickets for this thing, and it wasn't promising when after snaking our way through the casino, and they're always designed like IKEA, where it's like if you want to get out of IKEA, it's like good fucking luck. You can't. The one thing you can't do there is get to the cash register. So, we're going through all the slot machine rows and stuff with just the fucking sad, depressed people rubbing machines and blowing on them and doing all their other, like, magic thinking. And we finally get to this line. I'm sitting there in this line thinking, I think this might be it. It looks like a box office line, but I don't see anything about a magic show. And I don't know. I'm always sensitive about sitting in lines from the point when I was, an undergrad, at some point I read about an experiment where they proved that just by getting a few people to form a line to anywhere, they would eventually attract, several other people who would stand in line despite not knowing what they were waiting for or like anything, And I later on tested that in a casino in San Diego with some friends who worked there, and we just basically stood to it. We formed a line of 3 to a staff only door. Soon enough, there were like 2 women standing behind us, and then we just kind of laughed and just scattered, leaving them there. And I mean, it seemed all funny to us, and I'm sure in their mind they just thought it was must be the change table or something, But ever since then, I've been sensitive about it. I was like, it's going to be my turn one of these days, and I'm going to be in the line that leads to the fucking staff door or like an experimental psychologist. So we finally get up there. It turns out the first thing I'm like, I'd like tickets for Kozak's magic show, and she's like, the what? And I was like, oh, fuck, you're right. And so she turns around, and then she talks to another employee, and she doesn't know either. And then they finally summon someone back there who was like, oh yeah, that's around the corner over here. So, so we go around the corner, and sure enough, it's right there, and it's like a comedy club, magic show. So we get our tickets. Then we were 2 hours early, and we come back, we go in there, and we are 2 of a total of 7 people there to watch the show. The space is designed to hold about 300 people, I'm guessing, and we're all right up at the front. And it's that's already kind of awkward, just because, I mean, for one, I hate to be the one that gets called on stage, and then now my odds for being the person to get called on stage were dramatically increased, and it's just all intimate. If anything was awkward or embarrassing, it's basically a one-on-one counter now. I couldn't just be the dude in the back of the audience. So it turns out two of the people in the audience were these old women with New Jersey accents, and they were just shitty hecklers pretty much without even knowing why. They just thought anytime he'd do a trick, and he's doing some really good tricks. Like it would be, that's a trick phone book, or that's a trick card, or that's a trick like ring, or whatever it was. It was a, like they thought they were going to see Gandalf like do some legitimate like physics twisting maneuver or something, and they were just mad that it was an illusion, even though they had no idea how he was doing it. And so the whole time they heckled him, and that sucked. And then it gets really awkward because the other three people were these young guys, and they're sitting there, and at first Kozak the magician sees the makeup of the audience and says, "Hey, sometimes this is a family friendly show, but since it's all just a few adults here tonight, you want the adult version." So I was like, fuck yeah, like I'm having a drink, just trying to make it less awkward as it is. Like, you do whatever you have to do. So he gets all excited, and then, the adult version of the show, as it turned out, was just a couple like F-bombs here and there and stuff. But then the three guys in the middle, who I just, I'm not stereotyping or anything, but they're guys that look like about 20 years old or so, 21, and like they just didn't strike me that, for one, they'd be going to a magic show on a Saturday night in Atlantic City. And then, like, two, that they would really care that this dude was swearing. But so they keep whispering to each other the whole time. And then Kozak's like, why are you guys talking? Like, you want to share that? What's so important that you can't watch my magic show, even though you're 3 of 7 people watching my magic show? And so it turned out...
He's saying this like in an annoyed, hostile way?
Yeah, so it was already getting awkward.
Okay.
And,
all right.
And then it turns out the guy's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't mean any disrespect, but, like, I'm basically like a juvenile probation guy, and these guys are my ward, and I'm here to show them like a night out, like a safe and sane night out that doesn't involve." And furthermore, apparently it had some kind of religious like tint to it, because he didn't want them swearing. He's like, "You're really not supposed to be hearing any of this kind of language and stuff." So that just was like, just brought the whole thing to a halt. And then Kozak starts apologizing, he's almost like on his knees, like, I'm so sorry. And he said that how I work with children, I work with troubled youth, I work with suicide, with depression, with drug addiction. He's like, "Give me your card, please, man. I'd love to come out and work with you guys to get some extra money." And so at this point, the magician's just begging. Well, he's the combination of apologizing to these guys and begging for extra work. And I fucked the story up because the preface is right when we sit down, they show this video, it's his entrance thing, and it's all these other, relatively big name magicians and comedians that perform in Vegas, giving this guy their thumbs up, saying, "Hey, he's a great guy, he's an excellent performer, but we think he's crazy when he came to sign this 5-year contract in Atlantic City to do magic at the Tropicana." And they're like, "He'll be back here with his tail between his legs, and we know it." And it was super awkward, sitting in that audience with these guys saying that, because of course I think at first things went fairly well for him, and he just was hoping to prove him wrong. But anyway, yeah, that's pretty much that story. It just got worse and worse, and I mean, I think I was the only one in the audience that was really clapping at any like noticeable volume, so it spared me from having to go on stage, because he knew if he brought me on stage, it would suddenly be crickets.
So wait, what was
this is a depressing story.
Why were you going to see a magic show by yourself in Atlantic City?
I heard Kozak could turn a walnut shell to a line of crystal meth, and I wanted some. No, I don't know. Just magic is cool to me. I like it. It's an art form that I appreciate. Just like any other like dancers or whatever. I mean, it takes a remarkable skill and I mean on different levels, right? It's not just the sleight of hand. It's the stage presence and comedy to an extent. Just the distraction.
Yeah, I was at a event.
Yeah,
I was at an event at my kid's high school where it was a cabaret show, and there was one kid who did a magic act. And first of all, you got to just like give props to a high school kid for doing magic in front of his peers, because that's not a good way to get girls in general.
I was going to say the opposite, man. That's a good way to get pussy.
Maybe it is, but the thing that was great was he was really, really good. He had the skills, and I don't know. Is there like magic school, or do you like look online for like how to do these magic tricks? But it was really that art form thing that you just said. I totally agree with. It was actually really cool to watch this kid go through these motions and genuinely fool the rest of us there in the crowd. It was neat.
Yeah, what's not to like about that? Someone who just takes like the fundamental like aspects of of the way you understand the world and defies them, and you can't figure it out. I mean, it's like, and you know that the solution's there somewhere, but it's like the best puzzle that you probably never get the solutions for.
I mean, I'm not anti-magic or anything. It was just I was like, what? I was trying to figure out what the deal was. I thought maybe you were supposed to be there for some reason. I don't know.
That and it's just, hey, you've all been in this situation. You've been in a relationship for a long time. And you go somewhere and you're like, what are we gonna do tonight? Like we're gonna have dinner. We're gonna do all these things, and it's like, hey, there's an hour between now and the next hour. Let's go see some magic. That kind of thing just happens, man.
Oh wait, were you with your girl?
Yeah, it was me and Melissa.
Oh, okay. Okay. See, I thought you were by yourself. So I'm like, you're wandering around Atlantic City going to a magic show
on my own. That would have been better. I could have. Yeah.
What was the magician's name again?
Kozak. Kozak. You can check him out online. He deals
are we human, or are we magicians?
Are we magician?
Magic.
Singular.
Yeah. Magician. So I guess the final note, if anyone has anything else, I would recommend for listeners' homework is to go to Amazon Remembers. It's this, I guess this is Amazon service where you can submit a cell phone picture or any kind of picture you take, and they'll ping you back with some things that are related to it, products or something like that. So the fun thing is to just go and I picked this up from Miguel Lopez at GDC, who's just taking pictures of sporks on the ground and human feces or whatever he could find, anytime you go to the bathroom, and just send pictures into Amazon Remembers and build that database for them and see what they send you back.
Wow.
All right.
Everyone say goodbye.
Bye. We'll see you next time.
Happy trails.
Woo!
Cheers.